So, this is the matter. This story about the game Initial Sin entered everywhere, turning the lives of all people. Lin Yun, whose parents mysteriously disappeared, becomes chosen and receives unlimited privileges in the game. Plunging into the secrets of the game, he is getting closer to the unraveling of his parents. A large truck drove into the gate near the luxurious house. The system said that a good deed was completed and accrued points for merits. The movers loaded large boxes into the car body. Lin stood next to the mistress near the gate. The movers continued to load the boxes in the car. The hostess told the guy that if not for him, then she would have to close the shelter a long time ago. She did not know how to thank him. Lin waved his old woman and said that he did everything from a pure heart. He received 500 points from the system. The system told its owner his exact balance in the account. Lin went out of the gate of the mansion. The main character walked along the street. He commanded the system to cover the display. The full name of the guy was Lin Yun. He had neither a house nor a car, and his parents died. The main character went into urban development and went to one of the houses. He waved to his Uncle Me a hand and demanded that he open his gate. The guard with a glass in his hand asked the guy if he did that good deeds. Lin, with a smile, explained to the man that this was the last desire of his parents. The main character was attached to the system. He was 18 years old. The guy went to his apartment. Lin opened the door to the room and shouted that he was already at home. There was darkness inside. 2 years ago, the guy's parents left the system and a message before the abyss without a trace. Above the city was a blood-red, creepy fog. Lin heard somewhere inside himself about the approach of a great catastrophe and the intersection of the Sea of Suffering. The guy was sitting at a table with a glass of water. He looked out the window and thought that he had done good deeds for 2 years, receiving more and more merits. The system told the owner his number of points for merits. On an affordable balance, he had a complete 0. Lin displeasedly hit the table with a glass on the table. The main character was unhappy. He did not understand what the use of points for merits means. Lin was very scared. He rushed back. His glass turned red. The main character carefully looked out of the window to the night street. Everything around was red. Lin saw something frightening himself. He looked aside with excitement. The main character ran to the window and looked at the city with fright. Everything around was in a red, bloody light. Lin carefully looked around and up the sides. The system congratulated the player. He passed the qualifications of Original Sin. The first copy will open in a day. The main character was very surprised when he heard the words about the Original Sin. Lin walked with cautiously on a very red surface. He did not understand what it was before him. The guy scaredly looked at his hand with red traces. It seemed to him all the present. The surrounding reality around the protagonist began to crumble. He looked as a scared to the side and did not know what to do. Suddenly, a brightly fiery explosion was heard. Lin looked with fright aside and said that it had disappeared. Lin saw a yellow window near him. He realized that this was a merit system. The system told the owner that a low-level system plugin was discovered. He was successfully integrated with the system of Original Sin. The consumption system is unlocked. Lin sharply grabbed his head with his hands. The main reassured himself. He explained that now is not the time for panic. Lin, with excitement, asked the system, "Is it still an invitation to the game?" The system explained to the guy that email is available to him. Lin looked and saw in front of him a return score. He was no longer further where to run. The main character carefully looked at the phone. He read information about the Original Sin. Lin, scared and with excitement, noticed that a warning appeared on the phone screen. The system informed the owner through the phone that he was searching for a game called Original Sin. He had to contact them. Lin told himself that if there is an official site, it means that the game has existed for a very long time. The main character saw the image of the building on the phone. He needed to check that the game Original Sin is not fiction. The Human Security Bureau exists to quickly respond to the situation. The player had to pay all the attention for his own safety. Its purpose was to survive and complete the task. If Lin fails the task, then serious consequences are waiting for him. The player will receive various awards and treasures during the mission. Lin looked with interest at the image of the treasures in the phone. The system wished him good luck in the game. The main character said joyfully that the game is filled with monsters and supernatural phenomena. Failure can attract serious consequences. A good reward is given for the successful completion of tasks. Lin checked the base plugin in the system window. The guy thought he had some advantages at the beginning. The main character thought and looked aside. He told himself that he should definitely survive. Lin, after small thoughts, instructed himself that he should not die. The main character realized that it was time for him to act. Above the city was a thick red fog. Lin put on a fashionable new suit. Over the past couple of days, he collected food and water and warm clothes. The main character stood in a fashionable costume with jewelry. There were a bunch of bags near him. Lin looked carefully to the side. He thought that he could forget something with himself. The main character with fright noticed how a bright glow appeared near his bags. The guy looked at his hands in dismay. He could not understand what was happening to him. The system said that 15 minutes left before the start of the game. The guy had to enter preliminary data. Lin felt him fell into some abyss. He was unhappy due to the fact that no one told him about this before. Lin was in a new and unknown place for him. He seemed to sit at some table. The main character dared and turned to the side. He noticed that someone was sitting next to him. Lin looked around and was surprised to find that unfamiliar fighters were sitting around. They were all with their eyes closed. Suddenly, the old man fell off his chair and shouted very loudly. Lin rushed to his grandfather and asked, scared, "Is he all right?" The man raised his hand and hit her on the table from above. People turned in silence and looked in surprise. The man looked angrily at the interlocutors and asked if they tried to play before. The girl in glasses turned and scaredly asked the stranger, "Is he not for the first time participating in this?" She asked if everything was written on the internet. The man tapped the table with his fingers and explained to the players that the information on the official website is true. If the participant becomes a player of Original Sin, then he must take part once a week. Lin, with the girl, silently looked at the man. The guy and the girl were scaredly jumped near the table. They could not believe that they would participate once a week. The stranger swung and with all his might hit his hand on the table. All others tensed. The man said in an evil voice that the game will be held until one of the players dies. The main character sat and silently looked down in front of him. He thought that the man at first intimidates them all, but in reality, he wants to share his experience with them. Lin decided to talk to the stranger and get useful information from him. He sharply hit his hands. The main character said with a smile to the stranger that he was very strong, and he should not have problems with survival. He asked the stranger to teach them something useful. The man looked with interest at the guy. He sternly told him that there is something that he wants to teach him. Lin sat at the table with a smile on his face. The man viciously told him that he would not intervene in the debate of other people. The guy's life is the most valuable that he has. The stranger sat at the head of the table and said that the game has demons, perfumes, and ghosts. The man very strictly told the players that the game has special rules. Their violation will lead to an even faster death. Lin thoughtfully lowered his head down. He remembered the message on the site that the rules are changing, and they should not be violated. The girl decided to attract attention. She said that she received a notification that the store for beginners was unlocked. She was wondering if other participants knew about this. The players sat at the table and looked at the system windows. They all received a message too. The man explained to the interlocutors that they needed achievements to buy things. They will receive them only after the end of the first round. The girl with glasses was very surprised. She listened carefully to the man. The player in the baseball cap was unhappy. He did not like the store, since it was impossible to buy anything in him. The old man waved his hand and asked if they could get money for these glasses. The man told the old man that he had a good imagination. The achievement points can only be changed to ancient artifacts with spiritual energy. The main character smiled very viciously and slyly to himself. It took him some thought in the head. Lin looked at the system window. He had a proposal to change the points of virtue for points of achievement. The course was 1 to 10. The main character was very delighted when he saw an exchange rate. He remembered that he had a lot of merits and began to count. Lin felt rich. He considered that he could get more than 114 million points. The main character opened the system window. He wanted to access the newcomer store. Lin carefully examined various products inside the system window. The main character thought and calculated that judging by the course he could spend several thousand, and the system store would have been empty after that. Lin gave the command to the system so that it exchanges 10,000 points for him. The system told the owner that he received 100,000 points of achievement. The contented protagonist received the poison pole and other talismans to his inventory. At this time, somewhere from the darkness from the gloomy building there was an evil voice. He reported about the wonderful time of this year, when a ghostly wedding is celebrated. The girl was scared and trembled. She shouted that someone was singing. The guy scaredly said that 2 lanterns were burning. The man viciously shouted to the players that the game was supposed to begin soon. He hit his hand on the table. The stranger in a dark house in a hoodie and an evil voice sang that the red wax of the candles melted, and the maiden with the dowry would not return home. The protagonist, along with his new friends, at the table was frightened by a new task called a ghostly wedding. They should have survived until the end of the wedding in the mountains. Lin looked around and saw how he seemed to be in some noisy place. On the side there were tables and there were many guests. Everything looked gloomy. The girl furtively turned around and looked aside. She noticed how the guests rushed at the table massively. People with a demonic look grabbed food with sticks. The stranger at the table, frightenedly, turned around and asked the man what happened to people. The interlocutor explained to the girl that she could not ask about it. The more curiosity, the closer its death. An evil old man came up from the side. He asked the guests displeasedly why they do not touch the sticks. Lin scaredly turned into an old man and felt that he had a terrifying aura. The girl in glasses trembled with fear. She asked the man what to do now. The interlocutor turned and ordered the girl to simply ignore the old man. The demonic owner viciously said that on such a wonderful day, the guests decided to show disrespect for them. He demanded that people pour wine at the table. People began to approach the table from all sides. They carried food in their hands. The guests were more and more scared. Lin looked around silently and noticed that the inhabitants around him were very exhausted. The guy saw that the food on the table was luxurious. There was clearly something wrong here. Demonic women with burning eyes approached the guy from all sides. They invited him to drink a little and eat. Lin did not want to take food from strangers. He closed his mouth and shook his head. Some girl angrily shouted to the guests to drink. Around more and more people went around the table and offered food to guests. The old man joyfully shouted that he agreed to drink. Demonic children with dishes with a drink ran up to him from the side. Grandfather, without thinking twice, knocked over a drink from a saucer and swallowed it. The old man turned the dish aside and viciously showed that he was finished. The children looked at him from the side. Suddenly, grandfather felt severe pain inside himself. He began to lose consciousness. The dying old man fell to the floor. His body twisted from poisoning. The guests approached grandfather and viciously said that he had already intoxicated from one sip. They laughed out loud. The girl leaned over her grandfather's body. She looked carefully and said that the old man was poisoned. The main character stood on the side. Lin carefully looked at the body and thought that the poison was in all food and drinks. The system told the owner that a special mission was launched. He had to save life and help other players. Then the glasses of his merits would have increased. Demonic people continued to approach the guests from all sides and offer them food. The girl asked a man with a frightened voice with tears, what to do now? She wanted to save the old man. The man angrily hit the girl with his hand and said that the old man himself was to blame. She should sit silently. The man shouted to the girl that the salvation of the old man could endanger other people. The main character came from the side. He shouted in a confident voice that he would help his grandfather. Lin took a purple pill on his hand. She served to cleanse the mind. The pill removed toxins and was effective against poisoning. The protagonist joyfully and pretty looked at the medicine from the newcomer shop. It turned out to be much more useful than it seemed. The main character held out his hand with the pill and prepared to put the old man in his mouth. The girl said with excitement that she feels a pleasant smell. Next to her stood her surprised companions. They all followed the linum. The man was very surprised. He could not understand where the guy came from. A beginner's, it was such a subject for healing. Lin held his hand near the old man's face. There was a pill in it. Grandfather swallowed a magic pill and his body began to glow. The girl looked with excitement at the protagonist and said that he could cure the old man. Lin turned and asked his grandfather, "Is he all right?" He held him on his shoulder. The old man thanked the guy in a weak voice. Lin turned around and looked at his grandfather. He helped him to go forward. Suddenly, a system message appeared before the guy. He completed a special mission and saved the life of Chen Yu and received 7,777 points for this. The main character with a smile thought to himself that for the salvation of life, he received even more points. The main character looked carefully and noticed that a system window appeared in front of him. Lin studied the system notification with great attention. He needed to live to the end of the ghostly wedding in the mountains. There were also other tasks. He realized that the game has other goals, except for survival. The guy considered it and realized that in order to obtain more awards, you need to find hidden missions. The main character stood on the street near the table, surrounded by his new acquaintances. He thought that an increase in the assortment in the store could help him. Lin thought and realized that all the missions were worth working on them. The girl thought about something and looked aside with excitement. The participant asked friends if they saw where the villagers went. The players were worried. They carefully looked around and listened. There was silence around. Everything was in the red fog. Lin crouched and said that the inhabitants of the village ran away while they saved the old man. They still did not know about their plans. The player rushed aside. He shouted to friends that you can't just sit and wait. The man viciously shouted to the running guy to stop and did not behave like an idiot. The player on all his might hit his feet on the door in the building. She was closed. The man silently extended his hand from behind and put it on the guy's shoulder. The fighter threw the guy to the ground. He shouted to the players so that they would not act thoughtlessly. The man viciously shouted to the guy that if he did not understand, then he would die. The player was scared on the ground. He looked displeased at the fighter. The main character came up and told the man that the inhabitants are hostile to them. The fighter viciously asked the guy, why did he decide that there were no traps on the street? Lin slyly looked at the man and said that they have an ally who could help them. Participants in the game were very surprised. They looked inquiringly at the guy. A girl in bright clothes sat inside the demonic red building. Her face was closed. The protagonist pointed his hand to the side of the girl and called her the bride. Lin pointed to the side and said that the marriage was concluded with the ghost. The bride herself is a victim and wants to help them. The fighter told the players that he did not want to go with them. The bride could be a ghost. One guy looked at Lin and said that he would go with the main character. The participant looked at the player suspiciously. She decided that he was hiding something from them. Lin held the old man by the hand. Grandfather told the guy that he also wants to go with us. The main character tried to dissuade him. A participant came up from the side. She looked indecisively around and did not know what to do. The participant grabbed the man's hand and said in fright that she would be with him. Lin put his hand on the fighter's shoulder. He said that a man could call for help if something happens. The main character stepped aside. He was heading for the building with a girl and another player. Lin went to the door of the construction and widely opened them with a confident movement. Inside the building stood figures of people in red clothes. The bride sat in its place. In front of her was a table with red candles. The player looked as soon as possible. He said that in a room for the newlyweds, strange figures. Lin looked angrily aside and said that otherwise the wedding would not be called ghostly. The main character put his hand in his pocket and took out a small clay figure from there. Lin told the lady that they are random travelers. He invited her to escape with them. The stranger in red did not answer the guys. She sat silently and did not move. Lin gained courage and extended his hand to the bride. He wanted to look at her face. The main character took off the bedspread from the girl's head. It turned out to be a paper figure. Frightened Lin, along with other players, realized that there were only paper figures in the house. They did not know when the bride could have passed. The girl was very surprised that the protagonist in reality was confident in the existence of the bride. The participant realized that the guy next to her is a beginner. She could not understand how Lin could know what other players did not know. The system told the owner that he should save by Lin for a reward of 3,000 points. The guy thought and did not understand where the bride could be now. The girl looked around and said that there could be some kind of mechanism in the room. The participant ran around the room and made efforts to try to open the doors. The girl carefully tapped the furniture around her. She was looking for hidden places. The participant stood near the figure of the bride. She shouted to friends that the middle of the bed was empty. Lin was silent. He remembered that when the old man was poisoned, the girl was the first to understand what was the matter. She turned out to be very smart and bold. Suddenly, the guy jumped to his feet and ran forward to the figure of the bride. The player grabbed the figure in red clothes with his hands and decided to move it to the side. The main character looked in surprise aside as the guy threw a cardboard mannequin to the floor. Lin, along with their companions, approached and grabbed the board together to raise it. The main character, along with friends, looked into the basement. It was dark there and dust came from there. The frightened player asked his companions, "Is it really necessary to go down to the basement?" The main character realized that it is impossible to lose time. He ordered friends that they were going forward. Lin went down with the girl to the basement. They shone around the stairs around with candles. At this time, another player descended. The participant shifted forward with a candle and told the main character that there is only one road. Lin walked very slowly with his companions. They carried candles and looked carefully. The guy walked and did not look under his feet. He suddenly stepped on something. The player stopped. He looked carefully under his feet to see what he had stepped on. The guy was very scared. He saw a fragment of someone's hand in front of him. The girl came up and bowed above the ground. She raised her hand fragment. The frightened player was sitting aside and held a candle in his hands. The participant thoughtfully said that the hand is not real like paper figures. The girl thought. The main character approached and began to count the figures near the wall. Lin considered it and told friends that 6 parts correspond to all bodies on Earth. The player looked at the fragment of his legs. He said that all the figures are torn to shreds. Lin looked carefully at the mannequins. They seemed like something like him. The main character held a candle and looked at the fragments of mannequins. He said with fright to his companions that all figures are like themselves. A crowd of people in red clothes went into the forest. They carried a girl in a large cab. In ancient times, there was a custom when the bride of a rich family was carried with the dowry for marriage. The dowry for the bride could include jewelry and people. The main character, along with his companions, was attached to such a ghostly wedding. The bride turned out to be fake. The room for the newlyweds also turned out to be a fake. Lin told his friends that the real room is below, and broken figures show their future. The players thought. They thought about the words of the protagonist for a very long time. Lin, with a candle in his hand, said strictly to his friends that they no longer have time to think. They needed to move on. The protagonist and his friends rushed forward. They needed to quickly find the bride. Players rushed rapidly along the stone dark corridor. There was light in front of them. The guy ran at full speed. He pointed a finger forward and said that there was something there. The main character, along with their companions, ran to a huge and dark door. Lin went to the door and prepared to open it. He slowly pressed the door. The girl carefully looked inside the door. She told friends in a frightened voice that there is a bride. Lin saw the body of the bride in red clothes on the altar. Bright red candles were burning around. The players approached the body of a stranger. Her face was closed by a red rag. The participant carefully looked at the body of the bride and said that she was still alive. Lin carefully examined the lying stranger. She was still breathing and was unconscious. The main character asked the companion, "Can they wake the girl?" The participant extended her hand to the stranger's face and said that she did not even assume how she could help her. Lin turned to the player and asked him to come and help him raise a stranger. Lin, along with other players, took an unconscious bride in their arms and pulled her out of the basement. The main character helped to carry a stranger in his arms. He told friends to carry her carefully. Lin stood and rested with other players. Suddenly, the noise was heard from the side. The main character was alert. He realized that someone ran to the building on the street. Lin stood with his companions. At this time, the old man ran into the room with the girl. The old man and his companion were very scared. They demanded that they be saved. Lin turned around and asked with fright from his interlocutors what happened to them. The old man scaredly shouted that the inhabitants of the village were going to kill them. The girl shouted that the inhabitants of the village were armed and attacking everyone. The main character thought and looked in front of him. He decided to go outside himself. Lin told the girl to take the bride with them. He wanted to go out and see what was happening outside. The man stood on the street. Around him was a blue magical protection. Angry residents with weapons stood against him. Before the fighter stood a blue ghostly warrior with weapons. The man shouted to the residents that a ghostly servant would act against them. A whole large crowd of distraught warriors rushed forward at a man. The ghostly warrior began to throw off the attackers with the help of his blue magic weapons. The protagonist looked at the ghostly servant with surprise. He thought it was some special power in the game. Suddenly, a ghostly assistant rushed from behind and attacked a fighter. The man shouted loudly. Lin was surprised due to the fact that the magic warrior rushed at his own master. He noticed that a man on his back had many scars. The main character received a congratulation on the full analysis of the system. For him, it became accessible to the guide about the ghostly servant of pain. Lin read that the ghostly servant of pain was born and exists due to pain. He enjoys when he torments others. Such a ghost attacks with a long tail. Each attack brings fixed damage to the player. The girl stood behind with interest, watched a ghost attack a man from the back. The participant lit up with the joy of his eyes. She was struck by the power of the ghost. Lin explained to the girl that the use of a ghostly servant is expensive. He will not be able to hold out for so long. Lin grabbed the old man by the shoulders and asked with excitement, "Did he find that exit in the house in the yard?" Grandfather answered in fright that the exit was found on the western side. There is a low wall. You can climb through it. Lin, along with their companions, approached the wall. He shouted to friends to run to the western part. The angry resident of the village shouted to the guests so that they stopped as soon as possible. Demonic people from all sides fled after the main character and his companions. One of the girls was very scared. An evil village resident attacked her from the side. The participant accelerated, and with all her might threw one of the attackers with the blow of her legs. Another evil resident ran up to the girl from the side. He held out his predatory hand to her. The girl was not at a loss. She grabbed a man's hand and pulled her with her to throw him. The participant threw the man to the ground with a very powerful and strong blow to the ground. The girl swung and hit her legs with all his might, hit the evil resident in the groin. On the side of the battle, the main character silently watched with another guy. The participant looked at the players and said that they would not stand still, but acted. The main character, along with their companions, stood near the wall. The village residents began to creep on the side of them. The man scaredly told his companions that he would no longer last. The ghostly servant has only 3 blows. The main character took out a golden magic piece of paper. He told friends that he needed to go to desperate measures. A ghostly assistant soared next to the man. The fighter could not understand where the protagonist could have such a powerful talisman from. Lin waved his talisman and called on 3 heavenly masters. He ordered the masters to burn evil spirits who walk at night. The main character launched the talismans to the sides. He strictly ordered the demons and monsters to escape as soon as possible. The village inhabitants were frightened when they saw that flashes of fire appeared in front of them. After that, the flame flared up even brighter. The fire stopped brighter, and demonic residents burned in it. The man was delighted with the protagonist. Did he still have talismans? Lin explained that the inhabitants still remained people, and the talisman only allowed him to expel the demons. The man displeasedly asked the protagonist what they will do now. Lin slyly explained to him that they would adhere to the initial plan. Lin suddenly ran to the fence and jumped up. The fighter shouted to the guy to wait. The rustic residents with weapons in their hands ran up from the side. They walked and examined near the heaps of hay. The girl carefully extended her hand from a pile of hay. She prepared to attack the inhabitants from behind. The girl, along with the fighter, sharply pounced on the rivals and twisted their heads with their hands. The fighter carefully looked around and gently pulled the resident's body into the lane. The man, along with his companion, went inside the building. The girl told other players that they need to run. There were more and more inhabitants. The player looked at his companions in dismay and asked where to go now. Lin thought to himself that the banquet was spoiled, but the bride was saved. The ceremony did not end, and they missed something. The bride lay on the ground. Suddenly she came to her senses and began to pronounce some sounds. The participant with glasses turned to the side and shouted joyfully that the girl woke up. The stranger came to her senses and sat down. She looked with great interest at people next to her. Lin asked the girl with interest, "Is she okay? And what is her name?" The bride said that her name is Bai Lin. She looked around for people and asked who they were. The main character looked at the girl slyly and asked what she knew about a ghostly marriage. Bai grabbed her head with her hand and remembered that she was grabbed a couple of days ago. The girl said that she did not know why she was taken. She was abducted from a cart of strangers. Lin explained to the interlocutor that they should put the end of the ceremony. If they do not do this, then it will wait for a bad end. The main character looked at Bai and asked, "Did she really remember nothing?" Bai thought when she heard the words of the protagonist. She began to remember. The bride remembered something important, and sharply raised her finger up. She wanted to tell about everything. When the girl was kidnapped. The man asked the guy whether the path to the nanny temple was cleared. The guy replied that the path was not cleared, but the ceremony cannot be postponed. The protagonist in excitement recalled that in the Church of the Nannies, there is a statue of the goddess of the underworld. Lin turned around and told his friends with a smile that he already knows how to put an end to this ghostly ceremony. At night near the building stood several people with torches with weapons. Evil village inhabitants walked along the path. The player was very scared. He shouted to the main character, something like a place in ghosts. Lin held a magic piece of paper in his hands. He told a friend that he has a solution. The talisman of invisibility could hide the owner's body and transform it. The man became invisible and not audible. Lin held the talisman in his hands. He warned friends with his friends that if during the spell they touch someone, they will immediately become visible. It was necessary to be careful. The main character opened the gate and gently looked at the street. He listened. Lin, along with his companions, ran at all speed from the building. He shouted to them that they needed as soon as possible since they had only 3 sticks. The guy hid behind a tree. He threw out his hand and waved to the previous man with a torch. The resident did not notice him. The player with a smile said the main character behind the tree that the inhabitants really do not see them. The main character, accompanied by his companions, climbed the stone staircase up. On the way they had passers-by with weapons. Lin, along with friends, approached the building in the dark. There was a sign on it about the Hall of the Ancestors. The main character very quietly showed his friends with his hand to the side inside the building. They slowly went. Lin stood near the door. He carefully looked around the street and quietly closed them. The main character, after the door closed, stood near the entrance. He listened carefully. The girl inside the building told the main character that there was a path behind the hall. She leads to the top of the mountain. Lin was worried when he heard such words. He turned around and told his girlfriend that they should go. Suddenly, the participants saw some book on a red pillow in front of them. They approached her. Lin came up and took a book from the pillow called The Chronicle of the Village. The main character opened the book and began to read. A detailed story was written there. History talked about events in the 17th year of the reign of Emperor Long. It was reported that black pouring rain enveloped the earth. Everything was in the darkness. In the same year, great hunger came. People began to eat each other, and evil spirits went down to the ground. People obsessed with evil spirits attacked each other to eat. The main character, along with his friends, climbed the stone staircase up the hill. Lin held out the girl Bai and said she grabbed for him. The bride thanked him. Lin stopped and asked the surprised companion, "What black rain was the village chronicle mentioned?" Bai thought. She explained to the main character that no one could definitely answer his question. The bride told the story that the emperor was very angry and killed even the most worthy of the officials. Bai said that the heavens were angry. Black rain collapsed from the sky. People did not understand the danger and stood calmly under the downpour. The bride thoughtfully said that in the city of Gwangju there was the same rain. The guy angrily shouted the companion that she did not expect that there would be a lot of monsters and ghosts on the mountain. At this time, the girl came up behind and hit the player with all her might. He sat angrily on the ground and asked the participant, why did she hit him? Lin looked thoughtfully in front of him at the dark mountain. He thought that, judging by the chronicles, it was the temple who defended the village from black rain. Lin thought about himself and realized that all the inhabitants of the village became monsters. The man sharply held out his hand to the side and shouted to the players to stop. The satellites stood and waited for him to say. The girl in glasses cautiously asked the fighter, "What happened?" A man in a serious voice told the players that they had already arrived at the place. All participants looked in surprise at huge demonic doors in a stone wall. The players fell silent and hesitated. They looked in front of them, and they were scared to go forward. Lin, along with their companions, stood near the demonic gate and could not go inside. The man turned and shouted to the players that they needed to leave as soon as possible. Suddenly, someone's silhouette appeared at the gate. The main character with friends carefully looked closely. The stranger from the inside of the gate put his hand on them and opened them. The stranger at the gate told people in evil voice that they dared to arrive here. A demonic wizard came out of the gate. He told the guests that they would not return back. The man was very surprised. He looked scared at the wizard and realized that it was time to act. The fighter called the ghostly servant to attack the sorcerer as soon as possible. The wizard grabbed a blue lightning from a ghostly sorcerer with his hand. He asked angrily in the man, "Did he come from the reincarnation sect?" The fighter swung his hand. He shouted to the wizard that he did not know what he was talking about. The sorcerer raised his right hand up and told the man viciously that this was a wild ghost. The wizard took a huge magic circle in his hand. He told the man viciously that he would not be polite with him. The sorcerer lifted the circle over his head. From him, a bright glow came. The ghostly servant could no longer attack. It began to suck into a magic circle in the wizard's hand. The main character said in fright that the sorcerer was able to subjugate the ghostly servant in one movement. The sorcerer stood surrounded by a bright blue radiance. The magic circle sucked a ghostly assistant. The fighter scaredly fell to his knees. Gradually, the entire ghostly blue assistant sucked completely into a small black circle. The sorcerer viciously said that it is very rare for him to take such a spirit to himself. He closed a round vessel in his hands with a lid. The fighter felt his strength left him very quickly. He fell to the ground. The exhausted man fell dead to the ground. Other players became next to him and were very scared. The sorcerer viciously glanced at the frightened girl and asked if she was really a bride at today's ghostly wedding. Bai scared to the ground. She trembled out of fear and looked at the sorcerer. The bride began to dismiss her hands in fright. She screamed the wizard so that he would not fit and touch her. The old man glanced angrily at the girl and said that she had white skin and bones like jade. The wizard looked at the girl and said that the ghostly mother would be glad of the perfect bride. Lin rushed to defend the girl. He asked the old man, why did the bogan of the underworld needed a bride? The sorcerer got angry. He viciously asked the guy how he dared to interrupt him. Lin commanded himself that he should not be afraid and continued to pull time. The protagonist in a judicious voice told the wizard that they are the accompanying the bride, and they did not have much time left. The old man smiled angrily after the guy's words. He said that he was very interested. The sorcerer looked carefully at the protagonist and said that he was strange clothes. Lin looked frightened in front of him. He saw the old man rush to him. The sorcerer extended his hand sharply and laid it on the shoulder of a frightened protagonist. The wizard told the guy with a displeased voice that he was still snapping before him, although his death is inevitable. The sorcerer came close to the guy and asked who he imagined himself. Lin held out his hand in his pocket, and after a small pause pulled it back. The guy with a smile told the old man that he is a wandering traveler. According to tradition, if they do not know the cause of death, then after the death they become wandering spirits. Therefore, he asked the sorcerer. The old man raised his hand up and a blue flame came out of it. He asked the protagonist, does he really want to know more about a ghostly wedding? The wizard held his raised hand. A blue flame came from it. Lin scaredly looked aside. The wizard looked at the guy angrily and said that he was in a good mood today. Therefore, he will tell him everything. Inside the building was a woman's figure. Everything around was in a red fog. The sorcerer told guests that not mother needs this marriage. The old man told the players that during the ghostly wedding, the bride marries Vajrazadu. The sorcerer viciously looked at the frightened people and said that they are part of the sacrifice ritual. The sorcerer waved a huge bone in front of him. He viciously told people that there would be no even a wandering spirit from them. Evil and predatory spirits flew forward by the sorcerer's hand. The main character, along with his friends, stood very frightened. Around them was a bright blue glow. The old man stood and smiled angrily. Around him was blue magic smoke. At this time, a bright yellow radiance appeared from the sky. There was a fire explosion. The displeased sorcerer turned and did not understand what was happening here. The wizard scaredly looked aside. He saw a huge burning magic beast appeared over the players. The main character held a small golden talisman in front of him. Behind him was a burning predator. The player scaredly fell to the ground. He thanked the protagonist for salvation. Lin held in his hands a small shining golden figurine of the white tiger. Lin was still holding a talisman in his hands. He turned around and shouted to his friends to leave. Blocking one attack consumes a lot of spiritual power. They needed to win a little time. The girl fell silent. She looked at the protagonist in indecision. The participant waved her hand to friends and said that they had to leave so as not to interfere with the guy. The sorcerer was very amazed when he saw in the hands of the guy a spiritual transformation artifact. It was a middle-class weapon. The old man directed the bone to the guy and asked strictly who was he really. Lin smiled and told the sorcerer that he was just a wanderer. He slyly asked the old man if they would continue to talk or fight. The sorcerer raised his hand up. He got angry because of the words of the protagonist. The wizard waved his bone and attacked the guy with the help of blue lightning. Magic lightning crashed from acceleration in a burning golden tiger. Lin stood in a combat rack. He activated a ghostly flame for his protection. A protective cap appeared on top of the protagonist and the golden tiger. Blue energy could not break it. The sorcerer laughed very viciously. He told the guy that he relies on his weapon very much. The golden fierce tiger hung in the air. The wizard told the guy that when the spiritual energy would end, he would tear him apart. The main character was scared. He instantly thought to himself that he was caught. The main character felt as if he began to fall forward due to blue radiation. The old man held a magic bone in front of him. He joyfully shouted to the guy that he was no longer so impudent. The main character bounced back quickly and sat in a protective pose. He decided that he needed to intercept the initiative. Lin began to wave in all directions with his hands and called for his protection, the white tiger. A huge burning predator jumped up and rushed forward to the sorcerer. The wizard was scaredly noticed how the burning paw of the predatory beast appeared above his head. The sorcerer activated the green dome for his protection. The burning tiger could not break him out. The old man looked angrily at the guy and said that he could predict all his actions. Lin defended himself with his artifact. Without the support of spiritual power with the help of weapons, he would not be able to break through the banner of the soul. The sorcerer held out his hand forward. She had purple radiation. The wizard angrily told the guy that after his death, he would use the ghostly fire of vengeful spirits. He will improve this magical weapon. At this time, someone on the side launched gold magic papers into the sorcerer. Magic talismans crashed next to the protective dome of the sorcerer. Everything around shone brightly. The girl stood in a combat pose and prepared to further attack the sorcerer with the help of talismans. The wizard under the protective cap turned and looked at the participant. He viciously told her that she still wants to die. The burning tiger hit his paw on the protective green dome on a grand scale and he began to crack. The magic tiger continued to knock on the protective cap and he began to break up. The old man was scared and did not understand what was happening. The main character looked with excitement at the girl and shouted to start attacking. The participant swung and launched the golden talismans to the side. The golden tiger swung with all his strength and destroyed the green protective cap. There was a very powerful and bright explosion. Around the fragments scattered. The main character jumped high up. He flew away and landed to the ground. The sorcerer looked angrily at people and scaredly asked what they had done. The main character looked angrily at the sorcerer and said that his spiritual energy was exhausted earlier. The sorcerer was very scared. He shouted that this is impossible while there is a statue of the mother. Lin calmly looked at the old man and said reasonably that while the statue of the ghostly mother is a whole, then spiritual power cannot disappear. The sorcerer looked at the guy and said in fright that his strength could not be depleted. During the reign of Emperor Long, a sudden mountain flood occurred. As a result, the statue of the mother disappeared. People dug in vain and ineffectively in the river to find the loss. The search for the missing statue lasted 3 months, but there was no result. Poor inhabitants have flogged 30 times. The statue soon returned, but after that great hunger came. The inhabitants of the village were dying one by one. The main character was surprised to read in the book that the only punishment was a whip. Lin slammed the book and told the sorcerer that before people were just killed. The old man with a statue in his hands unexpectedly picked up from the side. He scaredly shouted what he took. The sorcerer was very angry. He looked angrily at the protagonist. An angry wizard rushed forward at the guy and wanted to attack him. Behind the protagonist stood an old man and a magic beast. Lin stopped the sorcerer and asked strictly where he was going. The sorcerer approached the guy with a slow pitch and held out his hand to him. The wizard told the main character with a frightened and broken voice that he wanted to distract him from the very beginning. Lin looked angrily at the sorcerer and explained that they planned every step. The main character slammed the book. He said that the villain should not keep diaries and reveal plans, as it is very easy to identify their weaknesses. The main character swung and threw the book right on the ground in front of the wizard. The player stood next to the girl. He looked angrily in front of him and shouted that he was waiting for this. The main character approached the figurine of the ghostly mother. She was brown and stood on the ground. Lin extended his hand to the figurine and touched her. The system told the owner that the mission was completed. The ghostly wedding was over. The main character received the calculation of additional awards. The old man sat on the ground and held his hand over the statue. He could not believe that the game was really over. The main character took his grandfather by the hand and said that he also saw a notification. Everything was finished. Lin, with the old man, looked aside. They noticed a frightened girl there. The participant with glasses screamed loudly with fear. She had tears in her eyes. The player in the cap went to the girl and said that she did not need to cry. No one was wounded and no one died. The guy slowly walked on the ground. He said in a dissatisfied voice that he was not lucky. The girl came up and hugged the participant with glasses. She turned displeasedly and looked at the guy. The player was unexpectedly scared. He screamed with fear and raised his hands up. The main character, along with his companion, stood near the body of a man. He lay motionless on the ground. The guy looked at the fighter and asked the girl how he feels. The participant replied that the man simply lost consciousness. His life indicators were stable. Lin looked at the lying fighter and told him meaningfully that the game was over. The main character stood near the demonic gate. He told friends that he did not know how much they work here. The girl raised her finger up and said that the calculated time was from 5 to 15 minutes. Then, all the surviving players will be teleported to the initial zone. Lin was worried. He turned around with great suspicion and looked at the companion. The main character strictly asked the girl, "How does she know this?" The participant answered the guy that not only he had secrets. Lin stood silently. He watched the girls gradually left him. The girl came up and asked the frightened bride, "Does she know what to do?" Bai looked at the players with fright and asked if they really left. The girl was wary. She looked away from the bride and listened carefully. The participant stood opposite the bride. She realized that someone was approaching them from the side. In the night darkness, dust clubs appeared. The noise of an approaching herd was heard. A huge herd of black warriors on horses raced across the field. They were approaching people. The warrior in front abruptly pulled his horse and stopped. The horses behind him also stopped. Lin stood in front of his friends. All the players looked scared at the riders. The main character was very scared. Bai told her new friends that people from her family arrived. The bride told the riders that everything was fine with her. She asked if they arrived by order of her father. The horseman jumped off the horse and confidently stepped to the bride. The fighter said that his name is Zhen Wei, and he is from the cavalry. He greeted the young lady. Zhen leaned in front of the bride. The main character stood behind and carefully watched it. The main character said joyfully to himself that they now do not need to worry. What will happen to the bride? At this time, a radiance appeared around his hand. Lin looked at his hand in surprise. She began to scatter and dissolve gradually. The participant looked at her new friends and said that it was time for them to say goodbye. Their paths diverge. Bright rays went down from the sky. The players gradually began to disappear. Bai stood with Jen and looked silently. Jen turned around and asked the lady, what were they in front of them for people? The bride replied to him that she did not even have time to find out the names of new friends. The main character carefully studied the system window. He found out the details about his awards. The store remained open until the next task. Lin thought displeasedly to himself that he received for all missions a reward of 14,500 points. This would not have been enough to cover the cost of used items. Lin told himself that if only the main missions are performed, then you need several games to exchange glasses for things in the store. He now realized why the man did not intervene. The main character waved his hands in front of him. He changed the system windows. He had a different situation. He lacked just goods from the store. The system asked the owner if he wants to return to the real world. Lin confirmed his desire. The main character was teleported to his room. His bags were still on the ground. Lin turned around and said in surprise to himself that he had returned to the same place where he began. The main character looked at his watch carefully. He saw that only a few minutes passed. Lin felt very severe pain. He grabbed his head with his hands. The main character fell tiredly on the bed. He realized that he needed to rest a bit. Tomorrow he could deal with everything else. Lin lay on the pillow and slept. He woke up the next morning, when it was already light. The main character woke up and sharply jumped on the bed. He heard someone tapping his door. Lin slowly silked to the door. He did not understand who could come to him so early. The main character extended his hand and grabbed the handle. He opened the door. The girl greeted the guy on the threshold of the guy. She asked his name. The guest told the owner that she came from the Human Security Bureau. She wanted to ask the protagonist about cooperation to help investigate some things. Lin was worried. He remembered that he had already heard the name of the organization of the Bureau for ensuring human security. The main character angrily told the girl that she appeared in the game for a reason. He asked where the organization had his address from. The guest explained to the guy that the game Original Sin chooses the players randomly. Their meeting was the usual coincidence. The girl looked aside. She told the guy that he would answer his second question now. On the side, there was an armed soldier. The girl told the guy that if he cooperates with them, he would receive all the answers. Lin was a little worried. He realized that he would need to cooperate with a girl in organization. The guy asked the girl if it was not a matter of the murder of people or experiments on them. The guest explained to the interlocutor that each player is very valuable. While he will cooperate with them, they will not threaten his personal security. Lin pointed his finger aside the soldier and asked the girl, "What is it?" The girl approached the guy and repeated strictly that while he would cooperate with them, they will not threaten his personal security. The girl waved her hand. After that, the soldier over the corner jerked the weapon. Lin scaredly raised his hands up and told the interlocutor that he agreed to cooperate with her. The main character grabbed his hand by the clothes. He asked the girl if she would give him time to change. The guest looked at her watch. She told the guy that they were leaving 15 minutes later. The main character changed and went out into the street. He stood near the car. The driver was sitting in the cab. She told the main character to get into her car. Lin rushed with his new friend in the car on the highway. The driver told him that yesterday's mission was classified as the most difficult. The girl behind the wheel told the main character that they all survived thanks to him. The driver strictly told the guy that the organization did not find him yesterday. The girl suddenly pressed the gas pedal with all her might. The car escaped forward. Cars at full speed rushed and stopped near a large building. The car stopped near the fence. The girl told the guy that they arrived. The guard went to the driver and demanded documents from her. The girl extended her certificate. The girl held a certificate in her hands. The guard brought the device to her. The device reported that the leader of the group named Ji Qinlin was verified. The guard near the car told the leader that he was welcoming her at the headquarters. The girl went with the guy to the conference room. Lin sat at the table and asked Ji, why did she bring him here? The girl put a glass of water on the table and told the guy that he would soon know everything. At this time, a noise rang out near the doors. Someone approached and opened it. The man opened the door and went into the hall. He asked the protagonist, how is he doing? Lin was surprised to greet a friend of Uncle Bai. He asked what he was doing here. Professor Bai was a famous folklorist, historian and archaeologist. Bai joyfully told the guy that he was engaged in research. But age makes itself felt. Ji explained to the main character that Professor Bai is an important member of the research group of organizations. He is also the honorary deputy director of the Bureau. The man thoughtfully said that he would not have received this position if there was no disappearance of the hairdryer of me. The main character abruptly broke off and ran to the man. He asked if his parents also worked at the Bureau. Bai thoughtfully looked at the guy through the glasses of glasses. He said that he knew nothing at all. The man said that Professor Lin Fengmian and Zhang Li are considered the founders of the Security Bureau. They were the first to find anomalies and predicted the appearance of original sin. Bai sadly bowed his head in front of him and said that unfortunately the heavens are always taking the best. Excited Lin grabbed a man by the clothes. He asked if his parents did not die in a car accident. He was wondering what happened to his father and mother. The man was worried. He wanted to tell the guy what really happened to his parents. Jai sharply jumped forward. She reminded the professor that he had no right to issue secret information. Lin was very displeased. He asked the girl, why can't he find out the details about his parents? Ji handed the guy a document. She explained to him that he should sign an agreement and become a member of the organization. The main character looked at the document in the hands of the girl. He did not tell her anything. A huge crab-shaped monster from the roof of the house rushed at people. The frightened passers-by stood on the street and saw terrible monsters around them. Ji explained to the main character that after signing the contract, he will become part of the battle with distortions. He may face oddities, madness, and death. Lin read the contract. He told the girl that the document says that people will not be sent to a mission from which they cannot return. Ji said thoughtfully the main character that each player is very important. They will not sacrifice anyone on purpose. Ji explained to the main character that the victim could save many lives. The main character, without thinking twice, put a signature under the document. He looked at the employee and strictly promised her that he would definitely learn the whole truth. Several people followed the video of the video. The man asked his colleague, what did he think about the guy? The employee said strictly that the guy is very impulsive, hot, tempered, and arrogant. The man smiled and told his colleague that this is all great. The man went to the door and turned on the light. He did not understand why it was dark in the office. Inside stood furniture and cabinets. The employee strictly told his colleague that everyone has different responsibilities. He is responsible for doubts and his interlocutor for faith. Bai handed a document for the protagonist. He said that he would enter their organization after he signed the contract. Bai told the main character that he has 2 more projects. Xiaoqing will take care of his training. The man ran out of the office and slammed the door. The protagonist and his colleague remained together near the table. Lin sat at the table opposite and looked at his girlfriend. They were silent together. The guy, in an indecisive voice, wanted to start a conversation with the interlocutor. Ji got to her feet and told the main character all the details about her work and position. Lin extended his hand and grabbed the girl by her hand. The guy realized that he should tell her details about himself. The protagonist shyly wanted to tell the girl details about himself. Qing looked at the guys and told about him all the details. The age of the line was 20 years, and he was unemployed. The protagonist was photographed from all sides. He was the son of the founder of the organization and abandoned the faculty of his university. Qing said that the guy is not in a romantic relationship. Lin viciously shouted that everything was in order with his orientation. Ji sat opposite the guy at the table. She told him that they know a lot about him. The girl told the guy that their organization was investigating all unusual incidents, including original sin. Lin was very surprised at the girl's answer. He realized that her bureau was busy with many other abnormal affairs. The main character asked the interlocutor, "Are there any other abnormal incidents?" Ji handed the main character a document at the table and said that he himself looked. Lin opened the folder and carefully read the chronology of various abnormal incidents. Previously, abnormal incidents were literally erupted with a flame from a mysterious cave. Lin found out that now the monsters from the cave crawled out. One of these is associated with original sin. The guy carefully read the documents. He asked the girl if other abnormalities disappeared after the appearance of the game. Ji explained that the anomalies became like small worlds. Ji said that an anomaly acts in the same way as black holes. When a large anomaly appears, everyone else is absorbed. The girl turned and headed for the board. The protagonist looked closely after her. Ji explained to her interlocutor that at the moment, working with original sin and derivatives of incidents are the main part of their work. Ji turned off the light in the room and stood near the board. The protagonist asked her, "What is it?" The girl explained that there are 2 categories of derivatives of incidents. She drew it on the board. Ji told the main character about the players who got out of control. Undressed players receive powerful power. Some of them begin to do evil. The girl said that they monitor and limit uncontrolled players. The main character impatiently asked his girlfriend, "What is the second group of people?" Ji drew the second type of derivatives of incidents on the board. She wrote a word about the dungeons. The girl stood near the table. She told the main character that this term does not apply to the dungeons of their mission in the game. Ji said that the term belongs to the dungeons that appeared in reality. The protagonist was holding a document in his hands. He squeezed his hand in fright. Lin put his hand on the document and asked the girl in fright, "Can the dungeons appear here?" Ji looked at the guy and strictly reminded him that the failure of the mission would have serious consequences. The main character thought and was frightened. He thought about the consequences of an unfulfilled task. Lin saw black reality in front of him. Near the building lay a bunch of bodies of people. These were the consequences of the game. When all the players are left, the mission is considered failed and then the dungeons are materialized in the real world. Lin explained to the main character that this is the second type of task that they need to cope with. The protagonist thought deeply. He realized that this is exactly what the failed mission threatens. Ji handed her friend a suitcase. She said that veterans of past games usually understand the dungeons. The girl put a suitcase to the guy. It was his introductory baggage. The main character very quickly opened his new baggage with interest. There was a weapon and documents. Lin looked at the gun with great excitement. He was surprised that he received weapons. The girl took the gun in her hand and charged a store with cartridges in it from below. Ji held the gun in front of her. She told the guy that he already had a weapon license. She promised him to teach him to use a gun. The girl threw the gun into the hands of the protagonist. The guy jumped up and reached for him. Ji strictly explained to the guy that the weapon did not stand out. It's just that only proven to persons give it. Lin held a gun in his hands. The girl told him that if he abuses the position, then the Bureau would get rid of him. Ji handed the guy a telephone. He supported the satellite signal. The interlocutor handed the guy a watch. A special detector was built in them. He was supposed to be signaling if there was something unusual. The girl explained that there are several indication colors in the detector. Each of them corresponded to the level of danger of the situation. At this time, there was a knock on the door. The protagonist, along with the girl, turned out with interest. The door opened and a man appeared in it. He looked strictly at people in the room. The main character continued to sit at the table. Ji asked the deputy, "Why is he here?" Deputy Sui Jananyan was responsible for the leadership of the special operations to combat freelance situations. He asked the girl how much more training will last. Ji explained to the deputy that the main points have already been studied. They needed to go to training in a shooting range. Zui told the employees that now there is an urgent task for them. He handed the documents. Ji, along with the main character, stood near the table and carefully studied the documents. The girl read in a document about a mission called a hut in the forest. The employee was scared when she read about the dungeon. She excitedly told the deputy that the guy had completed only one mission. Sui strictly answered the girl that she should accept the task or reject it. Lin asked the man what the consequences of refusing the assignment will be. Shui looked strictly at the guy and explained that after the refusal, the document signed by him would be cancelled. All memories will be wrapped about him and send him back. The main character thought that he needed to learn more about his parents. Ji jumped to his feet. He told the deputy that he was taking the task. Zhui prepared to leave. He told the guy that he would receive detailed information from the analytics department. The man left the room and slammed the door behind him. The main character remained at the table. The main character, along with the girl, stood together against a friend near the table. They silently studied the document. Lin told the girl that the deputy chief was somehow wary of him. Zai explained to the guy that the Bureau usually does not hire players who went through the game only once. Such players are mentally unbalanced. The probability of their death in subsequent games is very high. Near the table were workers in white robes. On the table lay a document. The girl told the guy that Professor Bai and other workers gathered his resume to the boss during the night. Bai explained to the guy that the deputy chief is a man of rules. The main character knocked on the table with excitement. He decided to say something to the girl. Lin looked closely at his girlfriend and said that he had become a stroller for her. Jai explained to the guy that he thinks a lot. Its duty is to complete this task. The girl told the guy to put on the headset. The intelligence team was supposed to contact him. Ji explained to the main character that the deterrence of the dungeon is a difficult task for beginners. Lin reached out at the table. He reminded the girl that the contract indicates that employees were not intentionally sent to death. Lin turned aside and said that the deputy chief is a man of rules. Ji answered her friend. She went to the door and opened it to go out. The girl opened the door of the car and prepared to sit inward. The main character carefully followed her. Ji looked out of the cab and required her friend to sit with her. The girlfriend reminded the main character to put on the headset. After that, she requested an additional analysis of the hut in the forest. The girl contacted the auxiliary representative through intermediaries. An employee near computers named Yuanwei promised the girl that she would provide her with information support. Ji was driving a guy in a car. By communication, she was told that a hut appeared in the forest 36 hours ago. The scale of pollution was more than 1,000 square meters. Currently, the area is blocked. Yuanui gave the interlocutor details about the temporary team. She asked if there would be any other questions. Ji at the wheel answered the interlocutor that she had no more questions. The protagonist said joyfully that the leader of the team of this task will be a veteran. Ji turned on the side of the main character and named his name Lee Suyan. The girl remembered the appearance of a familiar fighter in a dressing gown to herself. Ji explained to the surprised chief hero so that he would not expect too much from Lee. The girlfriend explained to the guy that he would learn about everything when he saw another fighter. The car raced at full speed along the road. He was heading to the forest. The main character was surprised when he saw a fighter Lee. He was just in a bucket at this time. Lin turned away from the fighter in displeasure. He could not believe that a veteran could lie on the ground near a bucket. Lee Suyan's age was 29 years old. He tried to go through the game 5 times. The fighter was an eternal alcoholic with a low percentage of tasks. Ji said displeasedly the chief hero that he now knows why Lee cannot rely on. Behind the girls stood soldiers with weapons. She demanded that she be given a bucket of ice water. Ji grabbed a bucket of water and poured her on her face to bring her to life. Lee came to his senses fright. He did not. What happened? And decided that it started to rain. The girl strictly explained to the fighter that they are on the assignment now. Lee thought he was hearing the voice of a bluebird. The guy is unexpectedly relaxed. He fell to the ground. He could no longer sit further. Lee lay on the ground and said that he was probably sleeping. In another way, he would no longer see a bluebird. Ji ordered subordinates to dousing the fighter several times. If nothing helps, then it will be necessary to get out of here. Lee lay unconscious on earth. The girl demanded from the soldier to follow her at the scene. Lin ran after his girlfriend. He asked her with excitement, what was the guy just called her? The girl told a friend on the move that she used to be called a bluebird in the intelligence unit. The communication worker told the girl that Tinlin used to be their captain. The soldier silently pointed his hand to the side. The main character with the girl went in that direction. The main character, along with his companions, saw a large destroyed building. There was a red bloody aura around. Lin felt darkness, an anomaly, and a strong imbalance around him. The main character felt that all this is like a squeezed fragment of reality. This was the dungeon that got out of control. Suddenly, the watch on the guy's hand flashed with yellow light. It was a signal. Lee looked carefully at his watch. He realized that the anomaly could escape from the dungeon. The girl displeasedly explained to her friend that this is not an anomaly, but a distortion. Ji ordered the fighters to put on protective costumes. She demanded that a whaling subordinate by the nickname determine their location. Lin looked around in bewilderment. He did not know what a distortion is and how to put on equipment. Ji told the guy that she had to teach him after the use of firearms. But after real experience, he himself will figure it out. Anomaly was a common term. She meant all types of supernatural. Distortion is an abnormal appendage. He is something like a virus or radiation. The virus infects ordinary people, distorting and turning them into monsters. A protective costume slows down the speed with which the virus extends to people, Lin thought. He realized that the anomalies distort ordinary people. They also had to be needed protective costumes. The main character with great excitement realized what ordinary people mean. Lin, after a small pause, realized that he and the girl did not need costumes, as they are players. Ji confirmed to his friend that they had long been subjected to the largest abnormal distortion. The employee told the girl in connection that after comparative calculations in the radius of distortion of the target, a tendency to subsequent distribution increased by 50 meters. King said reasonably that the scale of distortion is growing rapidly. This means that the level of danger has become higher. She asked how long it would take to mobilize resources. The employee at the computer said that it was already very late. There are no longer special operations in the city. The village is located in 800 meters. Jing demanded from a subordinate to determine the priority of evacuation. Next, it was necessary to apply for support. The main character approached a girlfriend behind and said that he could help save the situation. The protagonist led a drunken fighter with him. Ji told the guys that the hut in the forest is considered a nightly level. This indicates the presence of one or more supernatural phenomena or rules. This cannot be treated frivolously. The girl grabbed the door handle. She said they needed to conduct an investigation. You also need to be prepared to evacuate at any time when danger comes. The girl sharply opened the door to the building. She told the guys not to be divided. Ji was inside the building. She looked around with excitement. The main character, along with his colleague, went inside the house and saw that the girl had disappeared somewhere. Lin, along with his companion, were very scared. They could not understand what happened to the girlfriend. Ji contacted the connection with the rim and shouted that Ji had disappeared before their eyes. He did not understand what the hell was happening. The employee explained by communication to the guys that Ji's position was lost. She could not contact her. The frightened main character grabbed the phone in his hands. He wanted to catch at least some signal. Lee found the strength to speak in himself. He told the guy that the signal was when they were on the ground. The fighter in a weak voice explained to his companion that the girl was dragged to another place. It will not work to get in touch with her. Lee drank a drink from a jug. He reminded the connection of the killer circle that she had already mentioned the problem with the space with the previous group. The advanced group actually encountered the phenomenon of a spatial battle. The length of the corridor exceeded the actual length of the building. And after the opening of the doors, the situation became chaotic. But before that, there has never been a situation of forced movement in space. There were changes in the rules of the dungeon. Intelligence teams recommend abandoning the operation and waiting for reinforcements. Lin stood with his frightened companion. Lee said in an evil voice that the rules of space is an unpleasant thing. He asked the protagonist if he wants to quit everything. The main character exhaled heavily. He needed to think before the decision. Lin looked in front of him and told the companion that he needed another minute. Lin silently demanded from the system to open a store for the exchange of rewards for him. The main character carefully studied various products in the system window in front of him. The girl held the phone in her hands. She unsuccessfully tried to contact a subordinate by the name of the killer whale. Ji looked into the phone and noticed that there was no signal around her. The girl said thoughtfully that the signal was gone. This means that it will not work to contact anyone. Ji turned to the side and looked at the passage in the wall. She decided to get out of this place. The girl abruptly broke off and ran through the door to the next room. Ji at full speed ran through the door to the next room. The girl stepped over the threshold of the next room and stopped with surprise there. Ji looked in front of him in surprise. She realized that she was in the same room from where she came out. Ji looked forward in front of her and noticed exactly the same door through which she had already passed. The girl carefully looked around. She realized that she was in a spatial fold. Ji sharply rushed through the room into the next room. She thought that this time she could get somewhere in another room. Ji stopped at the door. She looked into the room in front of her. The girl turned her back in the doorway and began to look at the room on the side. Ji looked around silently and noticed that she was standing in a room. Near the walls were knightly armor. The girl said in displeasure that wherever she went, she returns to the same place. Ji looked aside. She decided to continue the study inside. The main character stood with his friend in a long, dark room. Lee looked in front of him at the door at the other end of the room. He asked the satellite, "Is he going to enter?" The main character looked with confidence in front of him and said that he was going to go further. Lin, simultaneously with the girl, stepped forward in the same space. The main character, along with his girlfriend, was able to simultaneously go to the same room in the same place. Lin contacted the connection with the rim and said that she would repeat him information about the key to the unraveling of the dungeon. The girl watched photos on the computer. She informed the guy that the advanced group received 3 tips. The worker looked at the photo. She said from the connection that the art museum was managed by a family of 3 people. Spiritual leading was transferred to some in the detachment, and they saw their picture of life. The killer whale saw a person's figure in front of me in the photo. She explained that in each statue in the building there are remains. This proves a large number of killed. The employee told the guy that the advanced group was faced with a stray killer. Firearms have a slight influence on it. Lin thought and realized that it was this stray killer that is the core of the mutation. At this time, the ghost of the girl appeared in the room behind the guys. He told people that they finally came. The protagonist and his companion were very frightened. They slowly turned their heads and looked back. The dark blue ghost of the girl hung behind people. She looked at them with burning eyes. The ghostly girl slowly moved forward. The main character, along with his companion, sharply bounced to the side. Bringing flew past people and looked at them very carefully. The ghostly girl flew up to the main character closely and carefully looked at him. Bringing slowly flew around the room. Lin, along with his friend, carefully watched him. Lee calmed down a little. He asked the satellite what would they do next. The main character replied that they would follow. Lin, along with his new friend, approached the corner of the room. They noticed how the ghostly girl dissolved in the picture on the wall. The main character told the guy that he is a Taoist and should deal with such things. Lee raised his finger up and said in a confident voice that there were no ghosts in the world. He called himself a convinced materialist. The main character pointed a finger to the side. He explained to a friend that he could say such words for the ghost. Lee went to the picture and touched her hand. He said in a thoughtful voice that this is an anomaly. The guy touched the picture with his hand and said that this anomaly is associated with a powerful distortion. It manifests itself in the form of a ghost. The killer whale told the guy in connection that anomalies are often manifested in the image of legends or monsters from literature. It is believed that people's thoughts also affect their product. The main character asked the interlocutor, "And what's the difference?" Lee showed his finger to the side and explained that all this looks like a lightning was nailed to death. Lee said that in ancient times people would believe that lightning punished the disrespectful and wrong person for his bad deeds. The guy told with the interest that if a man is now beating a zipper, then this is due to the fact that he stood under a tall tree during a thunderstorm. Lee drank a drink from a jug. He said with a smile to the main character that his first story is superstition, and the second statement is a science. Lin looked with interest in front of him. He could not understand what the ghostly girl wanted to tell them when he called them to the picture. Lin carefully looked at the picture. It depicted a boy with a backpack near the house. He realized that the girl asked for help. Lee pointed his friend with a scared finger at the picture. The ghost began to leave it. The main character, along with his friend, rushed as soon as possible to the picture. She was still glowing. The picture depicted a man who beat the boy with an axe. A frightened girl was sitting on the side. Lin explained to a friend that the girl warned them to be careful with her father. At this time, a revived knight appeared behind people. The knight slowly approached the guys from behind. They did not notice him as they looked into the picture. A warrior with burning eyes and weapons came closer to people, closer to people. The knight waved his axe high to break through the guys on top. The warrior hit the floor with all his strength. Stones scattered around. Lee and Line were bounced in time. The main character abruptly jumped aside. He grabbed gold magic pieces of paper. Lin, for protection from a warrior, took out his magic yellow magic sword. The main character, along with his companion, launched his magical weapon against the revived knight. There was a very strong explosion. The protagonist and his friend were bounced aside. Lee was surprised that his friend is also a Taoist. Lin reminded his companion that he should be a materialist. The fighter smiled and explained that he had a professional depot. The main character was very scared. He heard some loud and dangerous noise on the side. Lin looked closely and noticed how the stones began to tremble on the floor. He realized that someone was approaching them. The main character looked at the floor and noticed how something fell on him from the side. He shouted frightened to his friend to be more careful. Lin, together with a friend, was frightenedly noticed how the knight's body began to recover from many stones. The demonic warrior has completely recovered. A huge axe appeared in his hands again. The warrior swung his huge axe to chop people. The guys began to run away. At this time, Ji walked along the deserted corridor. There was silence around, and it was deserted. She illuminated herself with a flashlight from the phone. The girl walked slowly. She could not understand how many meters she had passed. Ji continued to walk and shine in front of her. She noticed that someone had appeared in her way. Ji was scared. She asked in a quiet voice, "Who is now in front of her?" There was a stranger in a medical form. She had a flashlight in her hands, and she asked Ji with fright whether she was a drinking companion of some uncle. Ji asked the stranger, "With whom did she see before?" The girl said that she saw a beautiful guy, and next to her an uncle of an alcoholic. They were looking for their comrade. Ji confirmed that the guys are her comrades. She asked the girl, "She was also like that?" The advanced group blocked the hut in the forest immediately after it appeared. None of the civilian could enter it. Ji fell silent. She looked at the stranger with great suspicion. The girl carefully watched the nurse. She had questions for this student. The stranger with the phone in her hand said that she is a streamer and is broadcasting about the supernatural. Ji was very surprised when she realized that now she was a streamer. The girl smiled and told her new acquaintance that her name is Super Malay Izian. Ji explained to the student that she did not know her. I burst into tears and told the girl that she was not sitting on the internet at all. I went forward along the dark corridor. She said that she was leaving and advised that Ji would look for her comrades. At the very last moment, Ji turned and shouted, "A student to wait!" Ji shone forward with a flashlight from the phone and told the stranger that if she wants to go through the main entrance, then she would not succeed. I scaredly held the phone in her hands. She did not understand how she could not go out. Ji explained to the girl that a spatial fold appeared in this place. People who have come here will never be able to get out of here. Ai sharply ran to the next room. She shouted on the move to the girl that she just wanted to intimidate her. The student ran into the next room in surprise and noticed that she was in the same place. I turned to the side and ran back into the room from where she came. I was very scared when she noticed that the same girl was standing in front of her. Ji calmly looked at the student and asked, "Did she understand now?" I trembled with fear. She asked how this happened. I scaredly fell to her knees and shouted that they would not get out of here. Ji asked the student, where did she meet her friends? She needed to find them. Ai explained that she met with the guys in the studio for the corridor. Ji shagal carefully with his girlfriend on the corridor. She said thoughtfully that they are in the oceanarium from which they could get out. I shouted with excitement that everything happens to them as in some story. Ji turned around and asked the student what story she talks about. The student in a gloomy voice wanted to tell her companion the story of the ghost of the killer from the art museum. I said that the owner of this museum once went crazy and killed his whole family. Then he disappeared. People who enter this place are forever lost and cannot find a way out. Strangers wander in a building until they meet a crazy father with an axe in him. After all this, strangers in the house become new victims. Ji asked her girlfriend in a calm voice, could she tell her anything else? Ji told the student that she did not tell at all about the person who was killed by her father. The victim became a ghost and began to look for a scapegoat. Ji turned around and looked with great suspicion at the streamer near her. I wanted to touch the girl with her hand. Suddenly, small lightning appeared around her. Students' hands turned black. Around there were bright electric discharges. The body of Ah began to burn. She swelled and began to collapse with a loud cry. Ji stood calmly and held an elongated hand in front of her. I turned very quickly into a blue ghost. The ghost very viciously asked the girl, how did she learn about all this? Ji explained the ghostly girl that she had very terrible acting abilities. The two of them were with her in the same space. Therefore, I could not meet with the main character and Lee. Ji glanced angrily at the ghost and shouted that she knew about everything that was happening here. Ji, without thinking twice, rushed forward to attack the ghost in front of her. The girl swung and tried to hit the introduction. The ghost quickly dodged to the side. The ghostly girl screamed angrily. She decided to try to rush at a person. Ji looked down in front of her. She saw a blue ghost on the floor. After that, the girl swung and with all her might hit the ghostly student with her head on the ground. Z angrily shouted to the angry ghost that her father would come for her. After that, the girl with all her might hit the body of bringing about the floor. There was a bright explosion. Jai scaredly closed her ears when she heard a strong explosion nearby. The whole room was covered with a blue fog. The reality around swam. The girl looked at the side and noticed a portrait of a man in uniform there. Ji came to her senses after a powerful explosion. She looked in front of her and was looking for a ghost. The girl calmly told herself that a ghostly student escaped. At this time, a suspicious noise rang out on the side. Someone walked and pulled an axe. Ji looked back. She decided that it was a ghost father with an axe from a terrible story. The main character along with his friends sat near the open door. They were very scared. Lee turned around and said quietly to his friend that everything was quiet. Lin confirmed in response that this is true. Lee with a smile told a friend that all this is like a scene from a horror movie. The guy said that the story looks as if two main characters decided that they managed to escape. They ran into the room. The saved two heroes stand inside the room and sigh with relief. At this time, a killer suddenly appears in the room, who tells people that he found them. Lee told a friend that at the end of the story, the killer kills people with a knife, and everything ends. Lin breathed out relaxedly. The main character neatly looked out into the corridor around. He noticed that the statue of his father really disappeared. Lee ran scared after his friend and asked him to wait for him. Lin thoughtfully explained to his companion that they broke the statue of a total of 11 times. The main character told a friend that they used different attack methods against the statue. But the time of restoration of the statue was the same. Lee looked at his friend with excitement. He was surprised that the main character watched all this. Lin told a friend that the statue is very completely resurrected. Therefore, he decided to carefully observe the process of its resurrection. The protagonist told a friend that during each resurrection of the statue, energy was received from the outside. Lee looked at his friend with interest and said with the surprise that he really noticed this. Lin answered a friend that he had noticed all this quite clearly. They walked forward along the corridor. Lin stepped a little forward and began to carefully examine the room. Yin pupils gave the guy the opportunity to improve visual acuity. Lin went to the door. He told his companion that energy appeared from it to resurrect the statue. The main character laid his hand on the door handle and opened. He looked carefully inside. Lin, along with his companion, went inside the room. They saw various paintings on the walls. Lee carefully looked around. He said that he was cold and he did not understand what they were looking for. Lin explained to his friend that he was being examined so far. The main character saw a picture on the wall from which a glow emanated. He said he found. Lin went to the picture and knocked on it with a finger. He realized that there was something behind her. The main character, along with his friend, took the picture and removed it from the wall. Lee saw with surprise a huge hole in the wall and said that they were an altar. The guys saw a tall mirror in the depths of the wall. A bat was sitting nearby. On the floor, candles were burning near the pentagram. Lin explained to a friend that there was fire and explosions in the talismans, but they are not suitable for small space. Now I had to act. Near Li, his magic sword flew. He said the spell that evil spirits would be punished, and the unclean force should retreat. Li swung and launched the lightning fiery straight in the mirror above the altar. Li looked in surprise in front of him. He did not understand what happened. Lin thought he was seeing a projection, but nowhere was there an essence. The main character, along with his friend, simultaneously thought that they needed to cause blue lightning. Li looked at each other with his friend, and they simultaneously shouted the name Ji Xinlin. The guy looked scaredly aside. He noticed something interesting in the mirror. Li showed his friend a hand in the mirror and said that something appeared there. The guys saw their familiar girl in the mirror. A huge knight with an axe attacked her. The main character in communication asked the killer whale if she could contact Ji. The girl replied that she could not contact. The signal transmission was difficult. Lin carefully looked in the mirror at his girlfriend. He said with excitement that they should definitely contact the girl. The essence of the altar is on its part. Li told a friend that he received a skill called a drunken sleep mechanism in the dungeon. The guy held a jug in his hands. He said that he had already drank his wine, but he needed to use another strong wine to manifest the skill. Li waved an empty jug in his hand. He asked his friend, "Where will they find strong wine in a short time?" Lin put a huge jug with wine on the floor. He paid for him 1,200 points of achievement. The main character acquired another jug and put it on the ground. He paid 4,000 points for him. Lin bought in a jug a decoction of precious jade and 200 achievements. Li looked at the jugs with interest. He felt thirst and desire to drink all of them. Lin asked his friend if he had enough to get drunk. Li joyfully shouted that he had enough of these drinks to die 3 times from drunkenness. Li grabbed a jug in his hands. He asked joyfully from a friend, "Does the technique want strong wine for which you need a strong wine?" Lin explained to a friend that he did not need a technique, but he had a lot of achievements. The girl continued to attack the demonic knight, but he continued to recover. Ji turned aside with surprise. She heard someone called her. She realized that this was a voice. Li, in the image of a small spirit, flew up and told the girl that he would tell her a decision to deal with an anomaly. Ji turned to the spirit and asked what she should do. Li explained to the girl that the knight is an immortal body. It is useless to destroy it. The girl should destroy the altar, which fuel this anomaly with energy. Li told his girlfriend that the altar was hidden behind the picture on the 2nd floor. Only in this space can it be destroyed. A girlfriend shouted to the spirit that she understood everything. Li pointed his finger and said that he needed to rush. The warrior has almost recovered. The girl and Li sharply ran to the side. A warrior raced behind her and waved an axe. Lin carefully watched his girlfriend in the mirror. He was very worried about her. Suddenly, something attracted the attention of the protagonist. He turned and looked aside. The guy looked at the picture on the table. There was a knight with a metal axe. The warrior waved an axe in the picture. Lin noticed that the canvas in one place in the corner of the picture fell off a little. The main character took the picture in his hands and began to tear off the canvas from her. The girl ran after the spirit. Li flew up to the desired door and pointed to it. At this time, a ghostly blue girl appeared. She screamed angrily and lingeringly. The girl was scared. She closed her ears with her hands to protect herself from a scream. Li flew forward. The warrior swung and cut it with an axe in half of the golden spirit. The girl was scared. Li woke up in the room in the corner. He grabbed his head with his hand and did not understand what it was at all. The main character sat in the corner of the room and tore off the canvas from the picture with his hand. Lin turned around and shouted to his friend to help him if he sobered up. Li already got to his feet. Li approached his friend. He said in fright that the anomaly detained the girl. Lin showed his hand to the side. He said that a friend would look at that picture. Li looked carefully at the canvas. On him, a frightened man ran away from the girl. Lin continued to tear off the canvas from the paintings. He scaredly said that the culprit in everything is not a father, but his daughter. The girl added to the dark rituals and turned her father into a monster. The main character explained to a friend that in the picture they saw, the girl lured people into the museum and did not ask for help. Was he looked at his friend and asked what he was looking for? Lin continued to tear off the canvas from the paintings. He said that he was looking for the essence of the girl. Lin explained to a friend that after the girl was reborn into the evil spirit, her essence remained in the self-portrait. The main character explained to a friend that if they destroy the picture, then they seriously hurt a demonic girl. Lin thought and fell silent. He thought what they would do next with a friend. The main character explained to the guy that the demonic girl divided them to cut down one after another. Lin smiled slyly. He explained that the ghost can be on only one side. This is the reason for the defeat of a demonic girl. The guys began to run around the room and break the paintings. They were in a hurry. In the room around her was dust, and scratches were visible on her body. At this time, a ghost from the picture viciously shouted to people that they would die. The evil knight prepared to attack. At this time, an evil demonic girl felt as if something caught her. Behind, as if something had hooked a ghost and cut it in half. Lin cut the picture, bringing angrily and loudly shouted. Ji looked in front of her in surprise. She realized that the demonic girl began to collapse. Ji noticed how the warrior in front of her collapsed, and the ghost began to disappear. Lin held a blade with a picture in his hands. He shouted at maliciously demonic girl that she came to them. The main character, along with a friend, grinned angrily and told the ghost that they would have fun well. Lee swung his blade. He pointed his hand to the side. There was a ghost with an evil knight. The main character, along with his friend, stood the ruins exhausted in front of them were lying. Lee, in the exhausted voice, told a friend that his spiritual power would soon run out. Lin handed his surprised satellite a golden artifact from his hands. Lee looked with great surprise and interest at the golden figurine in his hands. The figurine sparkled. Did he ask his friend with surprise, where did he get such a good thing from? Lin held magic papers in his hands. He said that the artifact is an inheritance for him from his parents. The main character warned a friend that the warrior gradually began to recover. The stones began to fly away and create the body of the knight. Lee, for his protection, caused a fiery tiger. The warrior was completely recovered and looked angrily at people. At this time, the side seemed to have hit the knight on the side, and pieces began to fly away from him. Lin was very scared and surprised. He did not understand who could attack the ghostly warrior. The knight froze in place. He no longer ran forward to attack people. The surprised protagonist stood next to his friend. They watched the ghostly warrior scattered into pieces. Lin realized that their familiar girl helped them now. He said in a joyful voice that Ji had coped with his part. Ji broke the mirror and threw his fragments right on the floor in front of her. Near the girl's left hand there were small lightning. She looked at the broken mirror on the floor. A blue ghost flew up from the side. He viciously demanded that the knight get on his feet back. Lee came up on the side and said in a joyful voice that this time the knight really died. The guy asked in a strict voice to bring. Did he have any more tricks? The ghost was very angry. He looked at the sides with displeasure and decided to hide. After that, the demonic girl turned back and flew away. She wanted to hide in the picture. Lee held out his hand after the ghost and screamed so that he would not run away. The protagonist jumped out on the road before flying in order to stop him. The protagonist put up a huge golden bag and began to catch a flying ghost in it. Lin shook a golden bag inside, which was a ghost. Lee came up frightened to a friend and said that he had caught a ghostly girl. Lee explained to the guy that such an anomaly can create distortion. According to the rules of the Bureau, this cannot be kept at home. The main character smiled slyly and reminded him of one jug of the wine of a drunken immortal. Lee fell silent abruptly. With great appetite, he presented a big jug with wine. Lee came to his senses. He decided again to remind his friend about the rules of the Bureau. The main character smiled and offered his friend several jugs of various wine. Lee decided not to bargain anymore and hit his friend. He agreed to his proposal. Lee put his hands in front of him and said joyfully to the chief hero that the soul of an anomaly was completely destroyed. She died meat. The main character heard someone came up to them from the side. He turned his head to the side. The guys held hands. They looked with interest at the girl who approached from the side. Ji looked at her friends and said in a displeased voice that they had strange hobbies. The guys jumped to the side and shouted fearfully to the girl that they were so accidental. The girl called the killer whale and said that the spatial anomaly disappeared. She asked what with the level of energy distortion. The worker looked carefully at the screen. She said that a quick decrease in the distortion area was discovered. According to preliminary evaluation, the incident was allowed. Ji turned to the guys and said that they needed to leave. The task was completed. They needed to return and report. Friends silently and with a smile looked at the girl. They prepared to leave with her. Lin with a friend and a girl walked along the street. Lee drank wine from a jug. The man in the office held a document in his hands and carefully studied it. Shui told the guy on the phone that Lin Yun showed himself well in this task. He asked the interlocutor, could he supplement anything? Lee told the man that the main character is very strong and much stronger than players who went through the game only once. Lee said that his friend has a sense of justice. He can take risks for the sake of ordinary people and teammates. The fighter stood near the wall. She told the man that the main character is watching everything in great detail and has great potential. He also hides a lot. Shui looked down and said thoughtfully that the main character has the legacy of his parents. The man thanked the guy on the phone. He said he received his report. Lee stood in the lane and carefully listened to the praise from the boss on the phone. The guy smiled and told the leader on the phone that he was working. The main character woke up in the morning and got out of bed. He put slippers on his feet. Lin, after awakening, was angry and walked around the room. He went to the bathroom. Lin stood near the mirror. He held out his hand to the tap of water to open it. The guy opened cold water and washed it to cheer up. The main character sat in a room in a chair and closed his eyes. He plunged into meditation. Lin was in a state of deep meditation. A huge, magic yellow beast appeared next to his chair. The main character looked at the calendar. He noticed that only 2 days passed in his reality. Lin looked thoughtfully down in front of him. He decided to summarize everything now. The guy imagined a calendar and realized that the original sin was for him once a week. The protagonist thought and realized that the deputy director Sui said that he did not like it when he used privileges. Now the man treats him hostile. Wei remembered the deputy director and thought that he could be wary. Lin thought and decided that his parents were classified. Therefore, now everything was safe for cooperation. The main character turned his head and looked aside at his golden magic beast. Lin stuck his head and noticed how the phone rang on his table. He reached for him. The main character looked at the phone and noticed that someone called him from an unknown number. The stranger to greet the protagonist in a loud voice. The guy pushed the phone away from himself. The girl was sitting in a greenish room. She said Fun in relation to the main character that her name is Feng Xinji and she is his assistant. Feng sat in a chair with headphones and large ears on her head. She told the guy in a joyful voice that they would poke. Lin did not understand the phone incomprehensibly. He could not understand what kind of hairdryer called him. The girl said in connection with the main character that he had a temporary assistant yesterday. A permanent assistant will be appointed later. Feng told the interlocutor that the last assistant was the sister of the bluebird. The protagonist asked the assistant with suspicion. Why did she not call it by the name of his familiar G? Feng reached out in an armchair and told the head hero that he did not have to know this. The assistant told the guy that the bureau often uses code names during the execution of missions. This increases security for employees. Lin, in a displeased voice, told the interlocutor on the phone that he had not yet finished his studies. The hairdryer worked on the keyboard. She asked the protagonist, "Why does he have no code name?" The main character was surprised to answer the assistant that he himself did not know this. The girl knocked on the keyboard. She told the guy that she would look now. The hairdryer examined the photo of the protagonist in the computer. She found his code name. The girl was surprised to tell the guy in connection that his name is Zhu Lun. Lin was very surprised when he heard such a name. Feng told a friend to wait. She noticed something interesting on the web. It turned out that the same code name is used by 2 individuals. The girl looked into the computer and said with the surprise that the other user is classified. The hairdryer launched a check on the computer, and it very soon successfully ended. The girl found information about a user named Lin Fenjin. He was listed in the base as a deserter. Lin was very scared when he heard from the girl that the man was listed as a deserter. The hairdryer continued to sit and work at computers. She carefully studied the information. Feng looked displeasedly aside at the candy in her hand. She told the guy that she would now figure out problems, and then he would call him. Lin scaredly shouted to the girl into the phone so that she would not get launched. He was wondering what happened to the deserter. Suddenly on the phone, the protagonist had a bright warning. Lin thought very intensely about the male suspicion of desertion. He recalled that he should be an elder. Suddenly, the main character rang the phone. He looked at him very sharply. Lin sharply grabbed the phone and shouted to the girl that he was waiting for an explanation. G asked his friend, "What happened?" The main character was surprised when he realized that G called him. The girl asked the guy who was he waiting for. Lin shouted with excitement to his girlfriend that he had just spoke with an assistant. G told the guy that the courier would soon deliver his badge to him and all the training materials. Lin turned off the connection with the girl on the phone. He expected that the courier would come to him now. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Lin went through the corridor to the door and prepared to open it. Lin grabbed his hand by the door handle and prepared to open it. There should have been a courier. There was a man with a box at the door. He told the main character that he should test his things. Lin accepted the box from the courier and silently looked at it. After a small pause, the guy turned to the side and sighed, exhausted. Lin stood in the doorway. He no longer even had the strength to be angry. The guy opened the box and carefully studied objects in it. Feng did not answer him calls. Therefore, he decided to calculate another information. Depending on the level of strangeness, they are divided into 7 levels. At the level of reverb, the monsters are slightly distorted by their energy. They are not very dangerous for ordinary people. Monsters at the level of the knight have very distorted energy. They are difficult to destroy. Monsters at the level of the bishop can use several abilities at the same time. They can hurt and easily kill thousands of ordinary people. A monster at the deity level can shake the civilization system. The highest levels of disasters and extinction are monsters that exist only in theory. They will pose a serious threat to the survival of the whole world. Lin thought that the player's level corresponds to a certain level of the monster. This means that he has a silver level. The main character told himself that the talisman and a figurine are not only abilities, but ordinary auxiliary things. Feng looked aside in front of him for safety. He needed to master some more ability. At this time, the main character rang the phone. He looked that it was an assistant. Feng told the guy on the phone that she had finally finished. Everything turned out to be very difficult for her. The main character asked the interlocutor if she found any information. The hairdryer displeasedly explained to the guy that she did not find the information, since she was dear to her life. The girl said that she wanted to find a few words. It immediately began to block a lot of viruses. Feng told the guy that she was very smart. Otherwise, they would definitely be caught. The assistant asked the guy, how did he like the information? Feng asked the interlocutor on the phone, does Lin Feng Tiani know? The main character told the interlocutor that Lin Feng is her father. The girl was surprised when she heard such recognition from the interlocutor. After a small pause, the hairdryer answered the main character that she was a witness who would be removed soon. The main character asked the girl if she was an assistant. Feng replied that she was. Lin asked the assistant if she took the initiative to check the code name for him. Feng replied that everything was so. Lin asked the girl, did she read confidential documents and then disappeared from punishment? The assistant was scared and did not know what to answer. The hairdryer burst into tears. She realized that she would now be expelled from the organization. Lin told the girl on the phone that she was not worried about that now. The main character explained on the phone that his father was only suspected of desertion. He promised the girl that he would not tell anyone that she was digging in the information. A hairdryer with tears in her eyes asked the guy if he would really not tell anything. The main character told the girl that he needed help from her. He explained that friends should help each other. The assistant asked the guy how can she help him. Lin explained to her that he needed a new ability. Feng explained to the interlocutor on the phone that this information is not secret. The girl promised the guy that she would now have to cross the information. The spiritual power of the magic mouse and the power of reason are energy. Their awakening methods are special. The distortions change the human body and make it possible to create and use energy. The source of energy is exercises, spiritual stones, and treasures. The protagonist asked the assistant, what is the safest way to awaken? The hairdryer answered the guy that there are many awards that can be used for awakening. Most people use such methods. The main character asked the girl with excitement, what would best help arouse the ability? The assistant promised the guy to send something. The main character was in his apartment in the city. He thought all day and night. Lin walked around his room in different directions. He continued to reflect hard. Artifacts stood on the table in the room. The guy continued to leave in circles. Lin suddenly stopped and hit his hands on the table. He said that he decided something. The main character approached the table. At this time, artifacts lit up on it. Lin picked up a crystal of grief of eternal flame. Such a stone can even hold suffering and burn the body. He can also arouse the power of fate and creation. The protagonist carefully looked at the stone. According to information from the girl, this crystal was supposed to help in awakening. Lin held in his hands a crystal of grief of eternal fire. It had a high probability of awakening spiritual power. It was necessary to use it as food. The main character decided not to waste time. He handed the crystal to his mouth to swallow it. He decided to first complete the task and then activate the stone. Lin swallowed a huge crystal. He waited a little and did not feel anything. The main character smiled joyfully to himself. He said that the stone tasted good. The main character suddenly felt a strong discomfort in his body. He felt bad. Lin fell to the floor in the room. He felt severe pain inside himself. The main character shouted that he was very painful in his stomach, as if something exploded. The system informed the owner that the crystal of the eternal flame grief has changed his physical condition. Lin felt severe pain and crawled on the floor. He activated spiritual power. The main character shouted that he realized how all this was used. The system told the owner that the spiritual transformation was over. The fire of fire was increased. Lin grabbed his head with his hand. He said that the probability of obtaining fiery ability is small. It was difficult for him to achieve 100% progress. The protagonist hit the table with his hand in a grand scale. It still stood magical artifacts. Lin stopped carefully and looked at the table. He saw a lying pink fruit there. The main character extended his hand and grabbed her pink fruit from the table. The guy attacked a magic pink artifact and began to bite off a little from him. The system said that the owner's physical condition has improved. Endurance has grown. Lin ordered the system to put all things in an improvement in physique. The main character saw several cans on the table. Fruits also lay. The guy with appetite began to absorb all the food that was on the table. The system congratulated its owner on a full study of the ability of fire. Lin relaxed in a chair. He said in an exhausted voice that he had finally finished. The guy held out his hand to the system window. He wanted to open a bag for himself. The main character looked carefully in front of him and studied systemic items. Near the guy's hand appeared a purple radiance. He said that he received almost all rewards for the first task. Lin looked at the purple fire near his hand. He told himself that he was doing all this for a reason. The system congratulated its owner on the completion of a hidden task. The guy was very surprised. He did not understand what it was before him. The system told the owner that he completed the hidden task. As a reward, he received the opening of the Center for Assistance. Lin looked in bewilderment in front of him. He did not understand what this was a help center. The help center opens before each task on a copy. There, the owner of the system can exchange his glasses for requisite. He will help him during the passage. Lin carefully examined the props in the store. He did not know what to do these few days so far. Suddenly, some idea came to the guy. He ran into the room behind the box. The protagonist took the box out of the neighboring room and placed it on the table. Lin stood in the center of the room. On the floor in front of him stood a figurine. The main character looked at the brown statuette and told himself that he would figure it out. The system said that the figure belongs to Empress Sanchuan Minamu. There are assumptions that it is the embodiment of some god. Lin put his hand on the figurine. He said with a smile that she would now follow the bright side. There will be no problems in the sacrifice. The main character took out a yellow bag out of the box. There was something strange and sealed. The guy put a bag in front of the statue. He silently looked at two objects. Lin looked at the statue and bag and said that two objects from the game should be put somewhere. The figurine Minmu stood on the floor. Next to her lay a large and yellow bag. The figure of a small goddess stood in the room. There was a reddish aura around her. Suddenly, some small radiation near the figure came from the yellow bag. The days gradually passed. The main character celebrated the necessary dates on his calendar. Suddenly, the girl G called the guy. He held out his hand and picked up the phone. The main character asked the girl what happened. G told a friend that it was time to open a second copy of the game. The Bureau sent members of the operational group, and they will soon arrive. The yellow bag near the figurine completely disappeared. The main character stood his back and told the girl on the phone that all this would be today. Lin put his battle suit. He said that he hopes that he had not missed anything and did not forget. The main character looked around and noticed that some unfamiliar fighters appeared around him. Lin looked around and asked displeasedly, "Is it really necessary to stare at him?" There was a lot of tension from the fighters. The girl told the guy in connection that he would soon get used to the work of the fighters. The hairdryer sat at her computer and carefully watched the guy through the video. The girl was sitting near the monitor. She said that I need to carefully monitor everything. No problems should arise in a copy. Lin looked at the fighters and said that he needed to hurry. He asked the girl, "Will there be a dangerous copy?" The assistant broke off the wand from her candy and said that the copy would be dangerous. The girl was sitting at the table. She told the guy that in this copy, success is only 10%. Feng informed the guy that he should do something else. She warned that other fighters would be next to him all the time. Lin, after a small pause, answered his assistant that he understood everything. Feng asked the girl, how could he contact her while in a copy? The assistant scaredly answered the guy that so far they have no such technologies. Lin asked the girl, why did he even keep in touch with her? Feng informed her interlocutor that she would help him cope with emotions. The assistant smiled slyly to the guy. She said that he could talk to her to relieve stress. He will increase his chances of passing a copy. Lin answered his assistant that they would at least then communicate in the chat. The system told the player that 15 minutes left before the start of the game. He had to go into the training zone. Lin looked scared at his hand and said that everything was already beginning. The main character gradually began to disappear. He was teleported from the center of the room. The fighters in the costumes silently looked at him. One of the fighters reported by communication that the guy entered the game and moved on a combat readiness state. The main character was teleported into the game. He ended up in a chair. Lin looked around and realized that he was on some kind of bus on the mountain road. It was deserted inside. The passenger looked forward and noticed that the driver was sitting in front of the bus. Lin began to look around the cabin with excitement. He realized that he was on the bus. Gradually, other players on the chairs began to appear inside the passenger compartment. The man looked at the people in the cabin and said that they all need to calm down. Verzila looked at the passengers and asked viciously from them, "Will they obey?" At this time, someone threw a metal jar to the floor. She rolled down the cabin. The girl was scared. She did not understand what place she was in. Verzila held out his hand to the girl and asked strictly, "Did she really get nothing?" The passenger scaredly replied that she received something, but did not understand what it was. The man looked angrily at the girl and said that her death would be very exciting. Verzila began to go to the passenger. He viciously promised her that everything would be fine. The girl went back in fright. Lin looked very scared at the man. He did not understand what he was going to do. The protagonist remembered that he was not unknown to the goal of the task. He decided not to intervene yet. The girl stepped back and rested her back at the chair. She could no longer backward. The man held out his hand to the passenger and asked angrily, was she really afraid of him? The stranger extended his hand to the girl and shouted angrily that he would play with her. Lin angrily thought to himself that he could no longer endure it. The main character ran to the man and grabbed his hand abruptly with his hand. Verzila turned to the guy displeasedly and asked what he needed. Lin with all his might squeezed a man's hand with his hand. She trembled. Verzila was scared. He felt that in the hand of the protagonist there is a very great power. Lin continued to squeeze the stranger's hand with all his strength. The man could not escape. Lin bounced to the side in the bus. He said that he first needs to complete the task. Verzila jumped sharply back. He looked at his hand with anger and fear. The main character looked strictly at the stranger and said that he would punish him. The guy's hand lit up with a violet light. Verzila got angry. He grabbed his hand by the bus and prepared to rush forward. The man abruptly ran forward along the bus to run to the protagonist. Lin raised his hand in front of him. She was on her bright purple radiance. Suddenly the man stopped. He told the main character that he would save his forces to assign. The main character stood in the bus and carefully watched the stranger. The system told the owner that he had completed a special task and saved the beauty. He received 300 points of merit for this. The protagonist was delighted to himself that he had finally received the award. At this time, the girl went to the guy from the side and grabbed his hand by the clothes. The stranger modestly and with excitement thanked the protagonist for salvation. Lin turned around and told the girl with a smile that he did what he had to do. At this time, an unfamiliar guy with glasses entered the bus. He looked carefully at the salon. The passenger carefully looked at the watch on the hand of the protagonist. The stranger looked at the protagonist and said that he was from the bureau. He asked Lin to call his name. Lin held out his hand to the interlocutor and said that his name is Ju Lun. The guy in glasses said that his name is Ju Gu. Next to him was his friend named Xiao Tao. The two of them were from the Club of Tanya. Verzila was surprised when he heard about the Club of Tanya. He turned around in surprise. The protagonist knew that the Club of Tanya is an early organization of players. If two participants were from one club, then this means that you could choose a team game. Ju came past the protagonist and told him on the go that he could rely on him. Ju went through the salon. He told the guy not to stick out better. The guy put his hand on the man's shoulder and said that first of all, he needed to think about the task. Ju looked at Verzila and asked with interest, what would he tell him? A man with a tattoo answered the guy with a frightened voice that he was completely right. Ju looked at Verzila and said that he had to apologize. The man said nothing in response. Verzila bowed to the passengers and asked for forgiveness for her behavior. Ju joyfully tapped his hands and told his companions that only by common efforts they will be able to complete the work. The main character prepared to sit in a chair. He thought that the guy had just approved his personality as a commander. Lin turned around and looked out the window in the reflection of the passenger. He thought that Ju was not so simple. The girl went to the guy and asked if she could sit next to him. Lin answered the interlocutor that she could sit down. The owner ordered the system to open a help center for him. The main character saw a huge number of different items in the store in front of him. He needed an exchange. The bus along with passengers rushed along the road. Someone followed them on the way. Near the dark red altar, candles glowed. Someone's voice said that the guy would die, and the corpses would rise. Candles continued to burn inside the red fog. The voice said that no one would go against the spirits. In the room stood broken glass green flasks. The voice said that one would die, and there would be a lot of monsters. The voice viciously said that everything would burn. There was a large hole in the desert room in the wall. The bus, along with passengers, arrived at the stop and stopped. The door on the bus opened, and people began to go out. Lin went outside to his new friends. People stayed at the stop. The bus moved on the road. The main character, along with friends, looked at the big scoreboard near the stop. The system said that the task called the ominous moon in the sky was completed. Lin, along with their companions, read the background of the task in the system windows. They must pretend to be employees of the FBI and came to the city to find out the details of the supernatural strange murder. Zhu began to probe his pockets. He decided to see what he had with him in clothes. The guy took out a certificate from the FBI employee from his pocket. He carefully examined him. Zhu looked at the document and said thoughtfully that the complexity of the copy looks low. Other players also got their certificates and held them in their hands. Xiao turned to his friend and asked why he said so. Ji told his companions that all their previous copies performed tasks to survive to a certain event. The guy thoughtfully said that the survival mission is dangerous, but all the conditions are known there. The main thing is to live to the end. Ji smoked a cigarette. He said thoughtfully that if you do not fulfill certain conditions now, then the copy will not end. The guy slammed his lighter sharply and said that if the player will show the initiative for investigation, then he will face unknown dangers. Ji put his hand on his friend's shoulder. He said that Xiao has his third copy and therefore he should be careful. Ji thought out cigarette smoke thoughtfully. He closed his eyes and said that perhaps something had changed. The players stood around and listened to what the interlocutor would tell them now. Ji looked at the players and told them in a serious voice that the complexity of the game was increased. The main character listened carefully to his colleague. He did not answer him. The guy told his friends thoughtfully that they need to act together in order to successfully go through a copy. Lin walked along the road with his companions. They were heading to the city building in the distance. Ji told friends that their only clue is a strange murder. In the background of the mission, they needed to start with this. The man invited his companions to go to the police first. They already had documents. Xiu explained to the man that the documents are fake, and people in the village would guess about it. When the police look at their certificates, they will be immediately revealed. The main character told his companions that he has an idea. They walked further along the road. People went to the village and noticed some local resident in a hat. He slept in a chair near the house. The protagonist approached the chair from behind, where a resident was, and hit him. The main character said with a smile to the stranger that he is a newspaper reporter. He asked the man to show him the place of recent murder. The man got angry. He did not like that the main character prevented him from sleeping. Lin stuck the money to the resident to reassure him. The man looked with interest at the bills. The stranger looked at the money in the hands of the guy for a long time. He did not dare to take them. Lin continued to hold a pack of bills in front of a stranger and smile. The man jumped joyfully and shook his hand to the main character. He promised to show the road. The resident showed the guests to the side where John's house was. She stood next to his friend. Together, they looked carefully and silently aside. A resident pointed to a small wooden house. The building looked deserted. Lin looked aside. The side next to him was still a local resident. Lin asked the stranger, why did John live in such a distant place? A resident said that John became obsessed when his wife and children escaped. Then he moved here. The man said that the owner of the house believed in all sorts of oddities. The man sat in the house and looked in front of him. Next to him lay the skull of the animal. His wife and daughter stood at the door. The girl with a toy in her hands turned and looked silently at her father. They left the man because of his oddities. The main character, along with his companion, approached the door of the house and began to tear off the protective stickers. Ju stood on the threshold. He invited his colleagues to go inside the house. They could find something suitable there. The main character agreed with such a proposal. A local resident was worried. He asked the interlocutor if he would arise any questions. The main character explained to the local resident that they would figure it out when the police arrive. Lin asked the interlocutor to tell him what John believed in. A resident said that John moved to this place 10 years ago. When John and his wife came to this place, they were enthusiastic. Local people accepted visitors without problems. 5 years later, a child was born in the family. The man stood near his wife and daughter. But John was a little strange. His girl always kept aside and never played with others. The girl stood and held a toy in her hands. She did not communicate with other children. John noticed the strangeness in the child. He went to different exorcists to expel the demon out of his daughter. The actions of the man were very angry with his wife. She was very unhappy. In the family between husband and wife, scandals began. They could not live together. As a result, John divorced his wife. Mother and daughter left home. Then John moved to another building, and after that he completely lost his mind. The stranger told the chief hero that he should contact the police for the details. Lin asked the interlocutor, were there any features in John's origin? The stranger scaredly explained to the main character that he had nothing to do with it. He did not understand. At this time, there was some kind of noise on the side. This was driving up a car. Lin turned around with the resident. Ji opened the door and went out. The main character asked what was the matter. The guy said that his friend Xiao Li heard the sound of approaching police officers. A police car stopped. An officer came out of him and headed for people. The policeman approached the guests and asked displeased who they were and what did they forget here. The officer held the donut in his hands. He shouted to strangers to raise their hands up. A resident explained to the officer Max that reporters came to them to collect the case materials. The policeman viciously explained that strangers could not enter the crime scene, as this is illegal. Max was still holding a donut in his hands. He went to the main character and looked at him. Lin looked at the policeman with a smile and said that all this by itself. Max asked the guy, "Are they really reporters?" The guy decided to show the documents. Xiao asked a friend scared, "Where did they get it from?" Ji turned his head to the side and answered the guy to just look. The policeman was holding a paper bag in his hands. He prepared to open it. Max opened a paper bag. He saw a whole pack of bills there. Max coughed and joyfully told the main character that he could walk here as much as he likes at his discretion. Lin hugged a man and said that they are here to take several photos for reporting. They would not refuse details. The main character climbed his second pocket with his hand and prepared to get another bag of money. Max explained to the guest that he could not show evidence to outsiders. The main character told the man that he would give him 3 packs. They are not outsiders for him, but good friends. The officer asked the protagonist, "What is his name?" The side of all this was watched by Xiao and Ji. Xiao joyfully told his friend that they could also save some money in the future. Ji asked his colleague if he could attract extraneous money into the game. Xiao turned around and asked with interest where the main character came from. The main character waved a goodbye to the local resident with his hand. A police car stood nearby. Z stood and also waved his hand. He thought that the main character was not so simple. Lin climbed the steps of the porch of the building. He said that the policeman went to help them collect evidence. The main character asked a friend, "What did he find out?" Ji said that the deceased wanted to commit suicide, but he had problems with weapons. The main character closed his eyes. He plunged immediately after that into deep thoughts. Lin saw in front of him how an unfamiliar man swung an axe. There was a pentagram nearby. The main character scaredly thought to himself that the owner of the house could cut himself into many parts. The main character stood next to his new acquaintance. She was very scared. Lin demanded from the system to show him the task. He read all the details about the task in the yellow window. The main character realized that suicide is not the true cause of the death of the owner of the house. At this time, a policeman with a small flashlight went to the basement of his site. Max went to the desired door. Behind her was a hall with evidence. He prepared to open it. Max went to the desired shelf and took a light bag from her. The main character told friends that they needed to wait for the policeman. The guy was sitting inside the building. He held in his hands a saucer with a cup of green tea. Lin held a cup in his hands. He looked thoughtfully and silently at her. The guy looked at the girl and thanked her. The girlfriend scaredly replied that there was nothing to thank her for. She held the tray in her hands. The man asked the players, "Do they really think that now the right time for tea?" There was a pentagram on the floor behind him, and candles were burning. The main character held a cup in his hands. He calmly explained to the interlocutor that he checked everything, and the room was not dirty. Ji sat opposite the protagonist. He asked what he had, what information is. Lin sat at the table and held a cup in his hands. He said that the deceased John at one moment came to this city. In this village, everyone believes in sects. The mission could fall out in this place. The girl went to the table. She asked the guy if they would go to the city of Heishui. Lin explained to his friends that they did not need to rush. First, they will collect evidence, and then go to the boss.